Hello, everyone. Welcome to another discussion of the second Apocalypse series by R. Scott Baker. Today, we start the discussions for The Great Ordeal, which is the third book of the Aspect Emperor series. We're going to be talking through chapters 1 through 3 today. We should have done this before we started recording, but I forgot. I guess next week we'll probably go up to chapter 7. That's about 100 pages. In the same paperback that we've been reading. With me, of course, I have the usual group of friends. Carl, would you like to start us off with introductions?
Yeah, I'm Carl, first-time reader. Excited to get going on this, and I am sorry I missed last episode, but I greatly enjoyed the end of the White Luck Warrior.
Yeah, we got to talk about what came before and the ending.
Yes.
A little bit some more. Steve?
Yeah, I'm Steve, and it's my second time reading the series and pick it up a lot. Just want to ask: is there a head on a pole behind me? And I also want to shout out the Baker subreddit just to say thanks for their support.
Hell yeah!
Awesome. This is hi. I'm Justin. This is Justin. I'm a first time reader of this series, and I am absolutely loving it. Yeah, some ups and downs, but like I feel like this again was a strong start to a new book. So excited to discuss it.
Yeah. I feel like this happens with every book, and maybe I'm noticing it more with this book, but it felt like yet another step up or level up to the writing from the previous books. The Sorville chapter was one of my favorites so far, and yeah, I think there was a lot more beautiful descriptions than I'm used to in this book. But I think that just generally started with the judging. I don't know if it's this book or just the second series as a whole.
I definitely noticed. I agree. A change in the writing style between the first trilogy and then this quadrilogy, but I didn't notice anything particular at the start of the Great Ordeal. I did notice a few more like grammatical errors, typos, things like that. Not like as many as I was maybe primed to expect, and I maybe only noticed them because I was told that this is where the editor fell off. But yeah, for those of you who don't know, I guess Scott Baker's editor, for whatever reason, was no longer working on the series by this point, on the last two books. But overall, it wasn't too bad. I didn't think at all. It wasn't distracting, certainly. There was only one scene where I felt like I kind of wish an editor was maybe a little. We can get to it, but there was one scene where I was like, I have no idea what's going on. Like this is illegible. This is you cannot possibly. It's not even like the White Luck Warrior stuff where you're like, oh, you're jumping around time, so it's unclear about the chronology. And I was like, this. It's just like don't know what's happening here.
Is it the head on the pole?
Yes. I think that was it. That had to have been it. It was definitely, yeah. It was just, I just remember going through it and being like, this was nothing. I don't know what, I think it was the head on the pole.
I feel like we can do a whole episode on what came before every book, especially now later in the series.
Oh my god, yeah.
But Carl, what were your thoughts on the end of the White Luck Warrior since you were busy last week?
Well, I was super happy to finally get a dragon. That of course, I'm a big dragon fan. I'm a fantasy nerd, so that's, I always like dragons. Going back to mythology and Tolkien, and clearly you saw the Tolkien influences there at The Hobbit, which I greatly enjoyed, and I think you guys pointed out in the last episode. And I really loved how it brought kind of the sheer horror of what a dragon is and can be to life. I thought Baker just did a phenomenal job, and I liked. Yeah, it was just really satisfying all around. I did feel. I mean, we didn't get Sorville in the last set of chapters, and I do feel like consistently, while I like his story, his stuff always feels like it ends very abruptly to me. Like it doesn't feel like it has quite a satisfying an ending pretty consistently. While like Esmenet's story, I mean, what a phenomenal last chapter for her, and I was so mad at her, and so frustrated that she kind of created a situation where Mathanet had to die, because I had grown attached to Mathanet. I think he's probably not, when you look at everything, I mean, obviously he started a holy war that was horrible, but I do feel like he was someone who was like relatively, he's like trying to keep everything together, and I think that's a good thing. And, he is complicit in a lot of terrible stuff, but that's true with everyone in this series. And I did feel sympathetic to him, because it did seem like he was, in some ways he's an underdog, and so I was quite sad to see him die, which is something that if you would have told me that, even by the end of the first trilogy, I would have laughed at you. I would have been like, Mathanet, are you kidding me? Like the frickin' Pope? No way. But I quite enjoyed his character, and was sorry to see him go. Similarly, Cleric, although Cleric was less likable, I guess, but I actually felt kind of good for him dying in battle the way he did. He clearly wanted to die, and it was satisfying the way he went, and suitably epic, And it felt weird, I will admit too, that like after I think I commented on the end of the Judging Eye how in Syllogus he like quote unquote dies multiple times. Like he doesn't just have one fake out death in Syllogus, he has like 3. And it got to the point where it was comical for me, where like I think that book ends with like, oh my god, that's Cleric, he's alive. It was just funny to me after a certain point. And but I think he got a good in game here. I was glad to see the captain and all of the shitty scalpers dead. I mean, they had just finally, they went beyond the pale, and we all, I think everyone kind of, you got the sense that's where things were going to go, right? Like these were not good people. That was reiterated over and over again. And then they started taking a drug, which was even making them, feel less, more cold-hearted. And, it wasn't a surprise that they turned on Mamara. And I was glad to see that she kind of, escaped relatively unscathed. I do expect her to kind of get to the end game. I don't know if she'll live out the whole series, but I was glad to see, her continuing story there. And weirdly, having one of the skin eaters get a heroic death that was not on my bingo card at all, but that was really cool to see. Like rooting for a skin spy is like weird. And he like, it's not because that skin spy is like a particularly moral person. He has these orders to protect Mamara for whatever reason, whatever role she plays in the Consul's plans. But still, it's like, we as the readers want her to be okay. So having someone save her, like that was huge. Yeah, I mean, all around, I really enjoyed the ending. I thought it was all just very dramatic, very well done. I do think Akemi and Mimara probably was the peak for me, just in the same way it was at the end of the Judging Eye. And I think continuing the trend from the first trilogy, I do feel like Akemi in some ways is kind of like the hero of this story. Not that he's always heroic, but I do kind of feel like he's sort of the protagonist in some way, like the person who's kind of like at the heart of the themes and everything that we're exploring here, and who, we're invited to empathize with. Certainly he gets a lot of point of view chapters. And yeah, and I'm excited now to jump into the Great Ordeal, and I enjoyed the beginning of it.
I was just watching Steve's face really closely that whole time. He had a very interesting expression when you said, I don't know if Mamara will live out to see the series. I never know. I appreciate the poker faces that Steve and Dan bring to the table. Like you never know what their reaction is. Mm-hmm. Like you'll get reactions, but you're like, what does that mean? Like I'm trying to learn some Dunyain shit, like read the little muscle twitches, and it's just not there yet. So the dragon thing, so confession time. I was looking at the Great Ordeal for some reason. I think I was trying to figure out a chapter breakdown or whatever before we finished the White Luck Warrior, and accidentally saw a sentence, just one sentence. I don't know why. that said they had a dragon waiting for them at the Kellhus. The next episode we recorded, Carl predicted that they'd see a dragon, and I was like, how do you do these things?
I mean, a lot of my theories don't end up becoming true, so I will say that. But in that one, first of all, as I think I told you, Varsha, I don't even remember predicting that they would see the dragon. I've been saying that they're going to see a dragon for like 3 books now. So it's like the Heron Spear, especially in the first trilogy. Like,
Dude,
I keep waiting for the Heron Spear to come up, because that's the like MacGuffin, the bomb under the table that I'm like waiting to blow up. And who knows at this point? They haven't been talking about it as much in this series. But the dragon, I have to imagine what I was thinking about as I posted on the forum was just that, like, the coffers, there's a lot of talk of it, like all the treasures being there and everything. And, the association mythologically, and certainly looking at Tolkien, of dragons and their hordes. And so it would make sense for there to be a dragon there with its horde. And lo and behold, there was, in fact, a dragon.
Mm-hmm. What did you think of the hell inside the dragon?
Wait, was there literally hell inside the dragon? Was the dragon like a gateway to hell? Because I did not get that.
I'm forgetting the details. Maybe Steve can help, but there was something that the inside of the dragon was part of hell or hellish. And I think, if I remember correctly, there was some commentary to the effect that it's not a place, it's just something that exists. Like, the outside it just feels like the outside, because it's not here. I'm totally making that up, but I got the sense that there was some description or some discussion of the outside and hell, as if they weren't physical spaces, just some things that exist that you can channel, kind of like the dragon did. At the inside of the dragon was hell, kind of like, yeah.
I think there was something in the epigraph of that chapter that spoke about, like, the way things die from the outside in, or something like that. And so, like, the dragon was like an example of that.
That's right, because it was kind of a zombie, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Sort of like falling apart, or
in the Baker tradition of, like, of like celebrating Tolkien by making a more twisted version of like what Tolkien created. Yeah, of course it's like, it couldn't be a straight dragon. It's like, horrific zombie dragon, which is so wonderful. Yeah,
what an intense zombie too.
That's interesting that it has sort of hell inside it, whether that's, I mean, I think that in some way metaphysically makes sense, right? And just in terms of like, well, where is its fire coming from, right? Like a lot of fantasy tries to like come up like, well, some like in the Tolkien tradition, I think kind of just like, whatever, dragons breathe fire, right? And I don't think you need to explain it, because it's something that ultimately doesn't really make sense. But, sometimes people do try to explain it. And I think that's an interesting idea that, like, there's some sort of connection, some gateway, something that's channeling inside of it to the, like, a connection to the outside that then it can, like, spew forth in this hellfire. And I do think that's interesting. It's also, of course, ties into sort of the view of dragons as being, in the West as tied to, like, particularly, like, Christianity and Islam. The view of them as being sort of satanic creatures, as being tied to hell, and demons, and that whole sort of serpent symbolism, particularly with the hellfire aspect of it all. So yeah, I think that's interesting. I totally missed that part. That's super cool.
Yeah, I think on page 546 of the Wetlock Warrior, he's not dead, he's too hard for hell, and then later it mentions. I just had the page. Oh, damn it. I just had it. Oh, on page 554, he dies from the outside because hell sustains him from within.
That's crazy.
Yeah. I didn't think of it at all as like, the extent of my thought was that hell was inside him, but hell channeling the hellfire, the dragon spears, Interesting. Yeah, I didn't think of that at all, and that's really cool to make that connection.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know if that's like laid out in the text or if I'm just like, taking what you're saying and kind of like extrapolating, but I think that would make sense, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And we certainly know that imagery of hell in this series is one of a fiery hell, right? That like when Mimara sees people with the judging eye, it's often, they're burnt, they're scorched.
Interesting. That is interesting. But for some reason, I've only been imagining hell as this like really dark, voidy place that like maybe stinks and rots for some reason. Maybe because of our encounters with it, with like dead people and the rotting dragon. But that makes so much more sense with the fire. But the way I've been picturing it somehow has just been like with rot and darkness. I don't know what planted that in my head. Might have just made that up, but
So no, Silaugus, that's definitely what kind of comes out of the Wraith King. Is it's all darkness. At least as described, it's like all the like spirits and shit. What is it? There's like the incredibly metal quote of like his mantle was hell, and it's described as this like mantle, this cape of darkness, right? And I think you're not pulling that out of nowhere. That's definitely part of it. I mean, the hell imagery, I think, is mixed and kind of similar in the way that it is. Like I know in the Christian tradition, like the whole idea of hellfire and fire and stuff, a lot of that comes from like works made after the fact, not even from like the Bible itself, like Dante's Inferno, right? Like the idea of the Inferno, hell, that popular imagery isn't even like from the Bible. There's actually descriptions of like what you could view as hell as like being a cold place in the Bible, and like ice imagery. And so I think it's just kind of playing with that, the different interpretation. And I think we've talked about the idea of there being like different heavens and different hells, right? So I even think that there maybe isn't one hell. There are multiple, just depending on your sins and, what gods you worshipped or what gods you spurned, that sort of thing.
Yeah, that makes sense with the kind of like the sparse mythology that we get of it, where you can get, you can sort of become tainted by hell, like to a lesser extent or a greater extent, depending on like what you're up to. But like in Silaugus, when they run into what Varsha was saying, like the dark, cold, dank, kind of hopeless version of hell, like I think our first encounter is where they run into that person down there who eventually they figure out he has like an eyeball in his heart.
That's right.
oh,
But that encounter was so creepy, yeah. I mean,
yes,
very affecting. Yeah.
I was just starting to forget that image, Justin.
It was a good moment.
Oh, so good.
For some definition of good, it was one that sticks with you for sure. So I know we keep asking this question over and over again about the appendices and the what has come before, how much at face value we're supposed to take it. So there were two things that stood out. We've talked about one of them already, about Kellhus going mad, but the other one that the voice in Kellhus's head is Samarmas. Like, should we take it for granted now that it is Samarmas, or are we still supposed to think that he thinks it's Samarmas? It could be something else, and so on and so forth. Steve with his mysterious smiles again.
I don't know.
I mean, my instinct is that it is what Baker wants us to think at that point, not necessarily what is. I don't know that, unlike, the appendices, which are seemingly written by a Camian, at least the ones at the end of the first trilogy, I remember kind of there being a conclusion that it seems like a Camian wrote these. I feel like the what comes before is sort of just like giving you I don't feel like it's an in-world text, you know? I do feel like it is in some sense objective, but it's objective of like a very slanted view of it. Like it tells us like we're told Samarmas is the voice because that's what Kellhus believes the voice is, right? I don't know that that's necessarily a conversation that it's Sammy, you know? Because we, certainly if you read things very literally, we would have no choice but to believe it's Samarmas because that is what Kellhus says, right? That's how he talks to the voices. He says this is, you know, the intelligent part of Sammy, whatever, the part I like stole from him. So basically what I'm getting is I'm not convinced that's Samarmas. I do not believe that. I have never believed that. I am convinced it is a god. There's just no way. It's a god. I don't know which god, but it's a Jokely seems like the obvious one. But beyond that, it's a god.
Well, the gods they're super tricky. Like the thing that I pulled from what came before of this book was the scene where the retelling of the scene where Esmenet goes to contract the Narendar, which she thinks she's dealing with one thing, but she's actually dealing with the White Look Warrior, right? But she believes she's contracted like an agent of a Jokely. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Like that. I kind of missed that somehow, or that missed me. So like, you know, it wouldn't be the only case of like the gods being sort of like sneaky and misrepresenting themselves and hiding. So I think it's interesting that like she thinks she's dealing with the Jokely, but she's dealing with the White Look Warrior, and a Jokely may very well be inside of Kellhus, leading him around. So, yeah, tricky gods with their tricky magic.
Exactly. And I think that perfectly what you were just describing, Justin, illustrates how I think like the point of view of that section is very much like, you know, if Kellhus is in some way possessed by a Jokely, you know, that's not something we've learned, right? And so it's not going to mention that, even though theoretically that's been happening this entire time, right? So, kitty cameo. Sorry, listeners, we had a brief Easter egg. What was I saying? Yeah. So anyway, that like if something hasn't been revealed to the reader, it's not necessarily going to be revealed in what has come before. You know, like I think even the stuff that I believe we talked about, Steve and maybe Dan mentioned that like there's a lot of really interesting stuff in what has come before, and I think a lot of the stuff that's really cool is like, and that you aren't told explicitly on the page about like the ancient history in particular, I think is in the appendices of the Thousandfold Thought. And so it's not like fundamentally new information, but it's just the sort of thing that it's like, it's not in the main story. You know, it's not what people are like actually talking about a lot, right? You know, or reading. And so that in some way you do have access to it. If you like, you know, if you happen to read the appendices, or if you like pick up on like little details, you know, I mean, because this series is written so densely that, you know, it's easy we all miss things, right? I mean, it's just inevitable.
So I was reading I was actually listening to what has come before, and I had a question, and Baker does answer this, but I just want to hear everyone's thoughts, because it didn't occur to me before about the womb plague, and we talked about this a little bit on the forum. But the womb plague was a result of immortality for the non-men, for the truce. Was that intentional? Did the Inchoroi know that that immortality would cause the womb plague, or was that on accident?
I read that as definitely intentional. Like it was their sneaky, underhanded move.
I agree.
Yeah. I think Baker's answer says otherwise, that it was a mistake to kill or to cause the womb plague, but I think so far in the text it has felt like it was very much intentional to go stop births and therefore keep the population at 144,000.
I think the mistake was on the non-men's part, was that they had the hubris to pursue immortality and it backfired on them. I don't think it was like the Inchoroi didn't know. At least what I remember reading of that. I tried to be. I remember at the end of the Thousandfold Thought reading the appendices and being like, wow, the Inchoroi were not the instigators in a lot of these wars. Like they were kind of a more reactive force. And so I was like trying to give them maybe a little benefit of the doubt. But like when we really learn about it, like they're definitely like, they're bad guys. You can sympathize with them because they're trying to, stop their damnation and all that. But like, I feel like it was very intentional on their part. They weren't like, oh, we're trying to help the non-men and oopsie, it killed all your women and children. Oh no.
My bad.
Yeah, my bad. That was a little whoopsie. Which I gotta say, great strategy on their part. Like, if you're gonna like, as far as revenges go, like you get, almost completely genocided, and you're like, well, in return, we are gonna genocide all your women and children. Like that's what. Touche.
Yeah. I think there was one other thing that stood out in the what has come before. We were uncertain, I think, when we were reading that particular section when Sorville appears in front of Serva with the Korai in his pouch, and she comments on the pouch. It was unclear whether she noticed the Korai too and she chose to ignore it, or if she didn't observe it at all. It seems, again, if we are to take this at face value, that she did not notice it at all. And stuff that happens later in the book. I think I was talking last time about maybe Sorville is mistaken about being completely hidden. But given Serva's confusion in the second chapter about why he feels so much love for them, even though they're doing all these detestable things, I think, it's becoming clearer now that he is in fact quite hidden from the Anna Surumbar observation.
We'll be back after a quick break.
Hello, my name is Lucy Starbuck-Bradley, and I'm here to tell you about Comic Boom, the Comics and Education podcast, sponsored by ALCS. Comic Boom is a podcast dedicated to exploring comics and graphic novels and the role they play in education. Each episode features a guest from a wide range of backgrounds, including comics creators, illustrators, writers, and academics. And importantly, I talk to teachers and librarians who are using comics in their classroom to engage young people, from their first days of school right up to graduate level. So if you're into children's literature, comics, education, or illustration, then there's sure to be something that will spark your interest in Comic Boom. Find it on comicboom.co.uk or wherever you get your podcasts.
I agree. I mean, I think it's still an open question about like how much we take everything for granted or assume, that like Kellhus doesn't have an overarching, some counter strategy, I guess. But I definitely believe that Yatwar has masked him, I'm with you, Barsha, that I think this chapter we got here at the beginning kind of confirms that despite how explicitly angry and hateful he's being, that Sir was like, why do you love us? This makes no sense. And I think the added layer that's interesting is Moingus sees through it. Moingus is not masked. And it reminds me like his birth father, Nair, right? That like there's this level of like madness, it seems like, that allows you to see through the god's magic. And that like and to not fall for Dunyain bullshit. That like there's a level of where you're like your psyche is so broken, or you have, or I don't know if it's a genetic thing or what, but just like there's something where he is able to just look through it, in the same way Nair was able to look through Kellhus's shit.
I think it was at the end of the White Luck Warrior, the scene where Sorwheel is talking to Moengus, and Moengus is talking about how he thinks that all the Dunyain are crazy because I think he says they think about thinking, right. And he's like, and that's, why would you do that kind of thing? And because like this is, we're seeing an example of it here, like with Serwa, she can, like, Sorwheel can be standing next to her, staring her in the face. He can try to punch Moengus in the face. He can tell her that he hates her, and yet what she reads on him tells her otherwise. And so she doesn't, she's like, no, I can't believe what you're saying. And Moengus is like sitting there being like, you're crazy. Like like how much clearer do you need it to be? It's so great.
It is. It's so deliciously ironic that this kid who is like, doesn't have the political acumen, the like just the harsh like self-control that like Kellhus, for example, has taught himself to be able to like lie and trick people. Like he wears his emotions on his sleeve, but because of this one magical mask, Serwa is just completely buying his bullshit, and not only that, is tortured by it. Like she is hurting. You can see like she's like, why do you love us? Like it actually touches her, and that makes her angry. And it's just delicious. It is wonderfully dramatic.
I had a moment, like, Baker has me so convinced about the competence of the Dunyain in reading expressions that I had a brief moment there where I thought Sorville might still be confused about how he's feeling. Maybe he's interpreting his affection for Serva, still not affection, particularly, I guess, lust for Serva, as hatred. He wants to hate her, but is not, because the Dunyain see deeper into you than you see yourself. I had a moment there where I was like, maybe Serva's right. But then I think reading more and more into it, I think he is genuinely masked. I don't know why I'm having such a difficult time believing that Sorville is completely hidden from the Anasurum board. Like it's just hard for me to grasp, but I think I finally bought it now. But yeah, Baker had me convinced about the Dunyain's abilities to the extent that I had to keep doubting it to this point.
Right, and particularly Kellhus, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we've been built up that like Kellhus hasn't lost, Every challenge he's come up against, he's ultimately won. And he's had setbacks, but he hasn't like really suffered a loss. Like you could argue losing Surway was a loss, like emotionally that seemed to affect him on some level, but in terms of like the like literal and sort of spiritual battles he's fought, he's won every one up until this point. And so it seems strange to see something where he's just outclassed. Like there's just nothing he can do. And I think it's tough to believe that, like I don't want to believe that either. Like I like keep being like, he's got to have a trick up his sleeve, right? Like there's something going on here. And maybe there is. I mean, that's the kind of open question I think, we're supposed to wonder.
Mm-hmm. I wonder, sorry, go ahead, Justin.
And this is just like, I don't know, just a thought. Like, is that, I don't know, does anybody think that that's the moment, like the circumfix moment where he kind of goes mad if like Moengus is to be believed? Like that's where he loses. And like, is it because he becomes like detached from his conditioning? And so like he's left kind of like unmoored, like ultimately like, possessed of this ultimate ability and power, but like no longer beholden to like pure Dunyain logic? Cause he's definitely feeling things in that moment.
Yeah. I think you're right. In that is definitely the moment where he kind of crosses into what Moengus the Elder would describe as madness. I mean, literally, that's when he has his like first very explicit, very clear vision, right? That's where he seemingly has some sort of connection with the no god that we still don't understand. Clearly, I mean, we got no answers about what the fuck was going on, and hopefully we get some answers before the end of this series. But like that's still so obviously magical that like I think that's the point where he kind of crossed the border there into madness. however you want to define that. I do still maintain, I don't know that he's fully like lost his training per se, you know, like I think in many ways he still is very Dunyain, but that also comes from my own perspective that the Dunyain are sort of full of bullshit, in that like they're motivated in ways that I just believe their philosophy is like the snake eating its own tail. Like it's all circular logic. The absolute, they're seeking like, they're sort of seeking that Zen wisdom, right? And I think I talked about this in the original trilogy, but it's like if they truly reached a point of like complete separation from everything that came before, everything that sort of defines people generally and motivates people, they would have no motivation. They would just be like not functioning humans anymore, you know? But they continue to seek this thing, which means that something is motivating them. And so they're not fully disconnected from the darkness that comes before. It's just that maybe they're more self-aware than your average person. And I feel like Kellhus is still very much that. He's just now has this added divine connection, whatever that is, you know, that we still don't fully understand. That Moingus called madness, right? And the freaking text itself, the relatively objective, you know, what has come before calls him mad now, every book.
Something else that I think is interesting in what has come before on page 25 of my copy, in the section for Esminette, it mentions that Kellhus has allowed love to cloud the thousandfold thought. So
that's interesting.
For someone like the Dunyain, who are supposed to be immune to those kind of feelings, very interesting.
If I remember correctly, that's what Maithanet thinks of Kellhus, right?
It's what makes it so hard to like predict Kellhus's character and even interpret it at this point in particular without the full picture. Is like clearly he does feel things, but he still has that sociopathic aspect to him that seemingly is innate but also trained, you know, that it's like both a part of his nature and nurture. And so it's hard to know, like, how much does he care for Esminette versus how much of that is calculation. We're told it's calculation, but and clearly it worked. Like, somehow he figured out that she could have his babies and other women could not. I don't understand that. I get she's, you know, smart, but that always just seemed kind of, I remember us speculating about that in the first trilogy. Like, why is he into her, like, in particular? And I don't know. It's hard to tell, you know, it's hard to predict. That's what makes it hard with Sword Wheels. What I was like getting back to is like hard to know what is his plan and what isn't his plan, right? Like where are the boundaries of his objectivity and his power, you know, versus where is he weak and where is he vulnerable and where is he emotional? You know, what motivates him? You guys talked in the last episode, right, about like, you know, is he motivated by any sort of altruistic feeling of like protecting humanity, defeating the consult? Like, does he have some larger plan or some more malicious, explicitly malicious plan? And I just think it's like impossible to really tell for certain at this point, you know, because I think it really could go either way. And certainly I think regardless of what happens, he's a piece of shit person, but like he's crossed the line so many times, but you know, I think what motivates him is still, and what he feels and how he functions, I think is still difficult to discern.
That reminds me of something else in the What Has Come Before that I had questions about. Apparently the thousandfold thought was Moingus's plan to save the world,
Yeah.
Which was interesting because I thought so far we were talking about how Moingus would probably side with the consult because the Dunyain by definition do not want to be found, and so the consult wanting to destroy everyone and block the outside would serve the purpose of the Dunyain, blocking off the world effectively, right? At least that was one of our interpretations of something from the first series.
Right.
So what does saving the world mean for the Dunyain? Did Moingus want to stop the coming of the No God? and therefore
Yes.
save the world from the consult?
That was explicitly what he wanted.
Mm-hmm.
It's Kellhus who said that his opinion would change. Moingus never agreed with Kellhus necessarily. And so when we're told that, if that's, I don't remember, like that's what it says in the what has come before, that was basically what Kellhus said. That was his argument. It was like, you, because you are so Dunyain, and because you don't conceive of the gods, and the God, the capital G, no plural God, you will ultimately turn and betray humanity for the consult because you will see that as being, logical in some way, right? Like as exactly what you were saying, Varsha, is like that ultimately serves the Dunyain's ends. Moingus never got to the point where he actually was going to do that, though. That it was just that Kellhus, as part of the thousandfold thought, when he was like predicting the future, was seeing that like you will ultimately betray us, so I have to kill you, and that's what led to him killing his father. And who knows if it's true or not? I don't know. I mean, we'll never know.
I think I misremembered that as Moingus was already on that path, but perhaps not. Yeah. Okay, that's fair. So what, I forget what the opening chapter was. Was it with Kellhus and Preuss? Sorry, before that, any other what has come before observations?
I think it mentions again about damnation for sorcerers is not predetermined, so it is not inevitable that being a sorcerer means that you're damned.
But that comes from blocking off the world, right?
Yes, that's what the Mengeka. Yeah, no, that's a great point, both of you there. That's the name of the school, right? The Mengeka school or something like that. The betrayers, the ones who turned on humanity, that's what sold them. That was the pitch, is like, you're damned unless you do this thing. And so they made the consult.
Yeah. I think what's interesting there is that Kellhus also has a plan to undam all the sorcerers, which makes me think that like his motivation for destroying the console and ending the Inchoroi is that like I think his motivations are not so different from theirs. It's his version of it, though, of perhaps like, I don't know. I talked about this a little bit the last time we met, like somehow kind of like deposing some or all of the gods and replacing them with like himself, or how else do you make, unless it's about closing off the world, which I don't think, he's not the 144,000 like guy, but how else do you undam what's considered damned? Like how do you redeem that without fundamentally changing something about the system, which is essentially what it sounds like the Inchoroi have always wanted to do.
Yeah, I mean, going off of that, what if, I'm not convinced that this is the case, but what if Kellhus, it's not even about saving all of the mages or cutting everyone else off, but like if he maybe has some idea of like how to experience an apotheosis, how to become a god. And so he's trying to save maybe himself from damnation, and to reach the level where he, exists on the same level as Yatwur and Gilgael and all of that, where he can have his own heaven and hell. I don't know. I'm just spitballing here. But that you're right. Like that's interesting, right? Because that's his whole pitch. And one of the interesting things about Kellhus is that when he's like manipulating people, he manipulates people with the truth, right? I mean, that's even what he says. And so, if his pitch is kind of stopping damnation, maybe he is planning on like ascending, becoming a god, and then having his own heaven for like sorcerers, for example, or something. I don't know. So they don't just go to whatever hell they would otherwise go to.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like, is it that feels both too selfish and too altruistic for Kellhus to do, but it is. but we don't know any of his motivations. So I think that's just as likely as anything else that we might think of. What did you guys think of the bread metaphors? The strange reversal of the when God made bread jokes.
It's horrifying. And that's some eldritch horror right there. That's existential horror. It really makes you hate the gods, you know? And I don't think Kellhus is wrong. Like, that adds up with everything we know about the gods. That they're essentially they're consuming human souls, you know? That is their bread. It's fucked up.
Oh, I didn't see. I was trying to figure out what that even means. Like, what do you mean that we are wheat for bread? They make themselves like we are food for the gods.
Yes.
Is that
I mean, that's how I interpret it. Yeah.
Okay.
They're eating the souls, essentially. If it fuels them.
Now I'm properly disturbed. But yeah, that is interesting. So, do you think he's right, or is he manipulating Proyas yet again? Also, we got a Kellhus POV for the first time in many months.
Yeah, I was excited about that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think he's telling the truth there. That just adds up with everything we know about the gods. Like, they don't, as much as I want to see the gods fuck up Kellhus, it doesn't seem like they really care that much. Like, Yatwur is the god of, like, the little people. And we've seen her, and she's horrifying, you know? And I love that. I think it's interesting, kind of the subversive way of, like, looking at kind of the dark side as Baker, of everything, as we have seen through Baker's eyes. And I definitely feel like that adds up, you know? I mean, that explains why they do what they do when it doesn't seem like they really care about, you know, the people.
Do you think that what he said only applies to the god of gods, or the sub-gods that we've seen too? And also, how does everything he said map to the use of it making sense rather than he? Like, what difference does it make? I don't think I got that.
Well, I think the question of capital G God is still up in the air. You know, I don't know that we've seen evidence of an explicit everything is united in this one higher power, you know? But I think the point he's making, I'd have to go back to see exactly the argument. But it basically, like, it's not, there is no, like, gender element, there's no human element, there is no, like, it's beyond that. It wouldn't view anything in that way. It doesn't function in that way. We're trying to make sense of it from our point of view. And so that's why we call it, you know, he. That's why we call it a father. But it's really an it. It just is, you know? And
I see.
I mean, that's kind of how I interpreted what he was saying. I forget the exact, I'd have to reread his conversations with Proyas there, but in terms of the wheat stuff, I think that's the gods plural. And I think I do believe Kellhus, part of his, what has been defined as madness, you know, however you want to, whatever, you know, you want to call it, is that he does believe in the god of gods, you know? But I don't know if that's necessarily how the universe functions. Like, the gods' relationship to something even beyond them, I think is unclear at this point.
I like that, like something that Baker is doing over and over again is, like, there's these parallels, like, between, like, you know, this conversation he has with Proyas, where he was like, you know, he says, like, the gods are nothing human, you know, like, they're nothing like what we imagine them to be. They're nothing like us. Like, we are purely, you know, we're here, like, our damnation serves them ultimately. So, like, they want us to be damned, right? And so, like, you have all of these humans running around worshiping the gods when they really have no concept of what they are. And it reminds me of, like, the way the humans, like especially, and we'll get to the Mwama shiver, but like the way the humans initially apprehended the non-men and said like, oh, we're so enthralled by them and so impressed, and just like there was the non-men tutelage, and then you have this, I don't know, like the Mwama and the non-men is an interesting like sort of parallel to like the humans and the gods kind of a thing, like maybe kind of like a maquette of that kind of relationship where it's almost like it's impossible to perceive, in part because like they've become so degraded by their worship and their sort of like mindless following of the non-men or the gods, and of course the Mwama additionally are slaves, and you might argue that like humans are slaves to the gods in a way, like they are, anyway, I just think that's really fun and interesting.
That parallel is really interesting. I think humans are slaves to the gods, and I guess you spoke about it a little bit, Justin, the damnation. Was it implied in what Kellhus said that the gods reap the damned souls and that's what feeds them? Okay, so...
Yeah, I think so.
So then, is that what Proyas got upset about? Because my biggest question when Kellhus said what he did about the gods was, what does damnation mean in this context? But okay, if only the damned souls are the wheat, what are the other ones, the non-damned ones who are pure and whatnot? And is it still true that the balance of the soul is what affects the damnation? Like what Mimara sees is that the judgment of the gods, and it also makes sense that it's an it at that point, because it seems a bit mindless, like it's just doing some mathematical calculations to decide the balance of the soul, to decide about damnation or not.
It simply is, right? Like it's basically defining God as like the universe, as the culmination, like as everything, right? It just the way, exactly, it's like God is the rules, God just, it is, right? It doesn't want, I think Kellhus explicitly says, I think that's even how some of the damnation works, right? Like, I think the sorcerer damnation isn't like the gods deciding sorcerers are damned because they do magic. I think they just are damned, Like, it has nothing to do with, like, how we in the real world might view, like, moral good deeds. It's simply by the act of doing magic in that universe, that is a morally bad thing, and so they are damned. Like fundamentally, that's just how it is, and that is the God, right? The God doesn't want that. That's just one of the laws, That's just how the universe works. That's the God, as opposed to you might say the small G gods, although I believe they still use capital G for them in this series. They then consume the damned, for any number of reasons. Or the people who are damned for any number of reasons is what I mean. They consume them because I guess it gives them sustenance. If we were to believe Kellhus, that is. Of course, this is just his point of view.
Yeah, on page 50, he does mention our damnation is the god's harvest.
Yeah.
Okay. That makes sense. I missed that. I thought all souls are harvest. But I also didn't think of the food metaphor first, so I guess. So what is the role of the gods in this then? Are does their damnation then feed the god of gods? Like how does that work? Not that any of it is mentioned, but like if we were to speculate, what does that mean?
I don't know, but it's interesting too. Like you asked the question, what happens to the people who are not damned, who pass on, go into the outside or whatever happens to them. And that like, that makes me wonder, like, what is the purpose of the gods? Like, are the gods just there like skimming, like they're just like gleaning, souls and setting up these like complicated rule systems that allow them to sustain themselves on souls? Like, are the gods just like parasites, it seems kind of like they are, but it also doesn't answer the question, what happens to people who are not damned.
Right.
Yeah.
I think what makes it tough to speculate is like, we don't know, are the gods inherent? Are they born? Are they created? Like, theoretically, could Kellhus, for example, going off the idea of like, if he's pursuing in some way apotheosis, like, is that possible? Like, were the gods mortal at some point and they became, through some sort of process, a fourth dimensional being? Because I think that's like the closest way we can define them, right? As they exist beyond the three dimensions that human beings and the Inchoroi and the non-men and all things, all creatures, they exist beyond that. They view all of time at once. But other than that, I don't know. I mean, yeah, parasite seems like a fairly appropriate word for at least our understanding of them so far. I mean, it's tough to say. Like, what are their feelings? What do they want other than just to be sustained? Do they? When you look at like a lot of mythologies in the real world, gods like want a lot of different things. They want all the things humans want, but it seems like here it's like, they hunger, but beyond that, like, what is it that they specifically, are they just defined as like, are they just concepts made real? Like Yatwar is like the oppressed made into some power, or are they like actual individuals in some sense? I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting question.
Yeah. There's so many questions here that I would like answers to based on like just this statement, like expand on it some more. Like, I guess one option for the non-damned is maybe they become gods in their own right, or maybe everyone with a judging eye becomes a god because they get to decide who's damned and who's not. Because there was something, it was about the unborn children of the people with the judging eye, about how they are basically sitting in God's lap or something. And and the other question I had was, and this has come up before, so it's not really new, what or who decides which god gets to reap a damned soul, or and we don't even know what happens to the undamned ones. So many questions, so many thoughts. I feel a little bit like Proyas, just not disillusioned out of my faith or anything, just like questions, edge of madness because I have questions.
I want to bounce off that I love that Saban got the exact same talk and is like, okay, he's fine. Like, I love that Kellhus is not just talking to Proyas.
Mm-hmm.
We as the reader, I think, very much had Proyas' point of view that like, you are the confidant, you were the guy, and it's like, no, Kellhus has other guys too, and Saban is over there because he's a fucking nut job. It's just like, yeah, whatever. Like, okay, the gods eat the damned, sure.
Yeah. That was a great moment. That reminded me weirdly of the movie, the Spike Jonze movie that came out, I don't know, 10 years ago with Joaquin Phoenix, Her, with Scarlett Johansson, where he has this moment where he realizes that she's simultaneously dating 7,000 other people at the same time. And he's like, what? Just like Proyas goes down. He he just sits his ass down and sits there for hours, right? And he's just going through it. Like
he thinks he's Kellhus' special boy, and then he finds out, Kellhus is seeing a lot of different people.
Yeah.
He had to learn the hard lesson, that it's tough, but you're not his number one.
The god is revealing things to you, but worse, you're not the only one who's getting these revelations.
It's tough.
Oh god. So I like that we got some glimpses into the past through that interaction too, about how Proyas did not like something that Sabon did, and Kellhus is like, what do you think we're doing here? We're building an army. What he's doing I agree with. Now be quiet.
I honestly, I don't know that I've ever liked Sabon as much as I did here, just because he kind of was like, just get over yourself. I love Proyas. I can never fully wrap my head around it because I hate zealots in real life, and I think it's because he does feel conflict, and I feel like there's a good guy somewhere deep inside him, but he's just like fully bought into, I think, as you guys discussed, like just the horrible structures and these horrible systems and beliefs. Playing someone who is the worst, who has just been terrible at every turn, is just like, he's just speaking truth. Is like, just like, fucking stand up, dude. Like, get over it, grow up, and in some ways I think that's what Proyas needed to hear.
He's like, yeah, morality's for children, dude. Come on. Like, we're at war here.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's great because in the first series, like, I feel like Baker goes through, like, pretty considerable effort to paint Saubon as like this very base, like, person who's just concerned with it, like he's always felt he was never quite enough, and so he's driven to succeed, and he will stop at nothing, and he's very like unlikable and sort of disgusting, and
absolutely,
yeah, Proyas finds himself sort of like subverted by him in a very like really fun, surprising way, where you're just like, oh man,
the unlikely buddy cop. I'm here for it. I hope they get some more good scenes together.
Yeah, same.
Steve's smiling again. I don't like. He has like 4 different kinds of smiles, and I'm just like what's his name? Akamian with Seshwata's dreams, like taking detailed notes. I'm like documenting Steve's expression. When we said this, Steve smiled, and this. What does that mean?
Maybe nothing.
Maybe nothing. Okay. What else happened in the first chapter? I think that was it, right? Proyas losing.
There was a head on a pole.
Oh yeah, that.
Yes,
behind you.
Yeah, that was the one.
That was like, yeah. I was reading this, and it was late, and I got to this section. And I just closed the book. I was like, okay, tomorrow, like, this isn't happening right now. I'm not ready. I read it over several times. It's not long. It's like a page and a half, maybe. And it's so wonderfully disturbing. But like, okay, so no God POV?
Well, that's an interesting idea. I hadn't thought about that. It's my feeling about it is it's an interesting mood piece, like if it was just like a poem, I would be like, okay, like this is cool. But like within the context of the story, I'm like, I read it twice and I was like, I don't know what's happening here. Like I have never in the entire reading of the series been so completely lost where I'm just like, clearly we're seeing something like, there's got to be some chronological fuckery going on, but beyond that, I don't know what's going on there. It was impenetrable for me. I like the no God idea. That's an interesting notion.
I think that because I love it as a POV, like, which we have had some no God POV in the past, like a little bit, like. It's very confused. And so this is like this like recollection, right? But some of the imagery in this page is like just pitch black, you know, like in the middle of page 45 on my copy, it says, it draws down its bladed fingers and combs the babe apart, plucking him into his infinite strings, laying bare his every inside, so that it might lick his rack and wretchedness like honey from hair. That's so gnarly. That's so gnarly and just like impressionistic and like what the fuck is happening. Anyway, I don't really know, but No God POV was the best. That was the best shot I could take after reading it a couple times.
That's interesting. Yeah, I think No God. I went to, is it the God of Gods? But
it
that doesn't
wants
make
too
sense.
much, you know. I feel like it would be impossible to write a POV from the God of Gods because the God of Gods just like is, you know. And this definitely gave me like there was a hunger, right? I mean, talking about tying into the idea of like the gods taking in the damnation, like feasting on the damnation, you know. I mean, maybe it's one of the gods. That's another idea. I don't know which one it would be.
Yeah.
Because they all are.
It does feed into the food thing, right? And he sees that these things are meat here. Love is meat. Hope is meat. Sorry, I think I interrupted you, Carl.
Oh, no, I was agreeing with you. Yes.
Yeah. And it was interesting also because it broke the section, like in the middle of Kellhus telling Proyas what it was, his revelation was, in the circumfix, we got this. So was this the revelation he had? And was this the revelation that led to him thinking that the God of Gods is an it that eats souls? There's also taste. One of the sons says to him, drink. So are the other gods the children, like the sons? And but if it is the God of Gods, or even the No God for that matter, why is it a head on a pole behind me?
I think that the one of the sons says to him thing made me think of the Inchoroi of what are their names?
Orang and I don't know the other guy.
Yeah, Arax.
Yeah. Okay.
That's what I drew there.
I remember Orang always
that's
because there was an emperor who ruled the Indian subcontinent named Aurangzeb a long time ago.
There you go. I mean, we know Baker pulls from all over. Certainly has pulled from India, as you pointed out in the first trilogy. Interesting. Because, that's an interesting point, right? The description of them is like crocodilian and sons. Yeah, I definitely see the. This does feel like a No God POV, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't fear damnation. That's interesting because there's a head on a pole behind you.
Was there a head on a pole in that scene where Sorville was shown something by his slave's name Prosperian in the shrank body? I seem to recall a pole in there somewhere, but I could be misremembering.
I don't remember. I definitely feel like there have been heads on poles at some point. I'm with you on that. That definitely seems like a thing that's happened. I don't know.
Yep.
Yeah, there were like hundreds of heads on poles.
Yeah.
In the series.
Oh, and also the chapter starts. Hundreds of heads. The chapter starts with the living should not haunt the dead, which ends this section too. But it was also how the chapter started with which was a conversation between two people talking about eating shrank and what that was doing to their constitution. So,
Oh, you know what? Maybe it's about like the no god coming into the Great Ordeal. Like they're consuming the Shrank, who in some way are connected to the no god, and so maybe it is about like the no god beginning to come into the world and coming into the army. I mean, that's an interesting connection you pointed out, Barsha, right? You know, and it's interesting, and now that I'm like examining this even more closely, you know, stuff like italicizing not and because you fear not damnation, like that to me, one, I mean, the implication there is it does fear whatever this is, but it doesn't fear damnation for whatever reason. And then, you know, it doesn't fear damnation because there's a head on a pole behind you. I don't know. I don't know what that means.
yeah. And what do you...
I like the no god idea though. That's a really interesting theory.
That seems likely, I think. And the first line of the next section was Proya saying, "What was your revelation that the no god would return, that the end of all things was nigh?" It could just be very well that transition, that the no god was returning, a bit of a, I don't know if foreshadowing is the right word, but what do you think it even means? I've been trying to parse that line, "the living shall not haunt the dead." I find it hauntingly beautiful, but I've been having trouble making sense of it.
The dead just can't even be. I mean, I'm with you there. I also am not sure, but maybe it's like the dead just like aren't even concerned with the living, you know, for whatever they're past that, either because their existence is so terrible, or you know, they're just not concerned with what mortals are dealing with.
So is it that the dead souls somehow still are conscious of the living, and or whatever they do now to block off the outside, that could also affect the souls currently being tormented there, and their continued living haunts them? No, that doesn't make sense. That's a far too much of a stretch. But yeah, I was very intrigued by that line. I think of all the things that we read today, there have been a few, that is the most interesting for me to pursue.
There's definitely a lot to unpack here. There are definitely things that are interesting to interpret. I mean, I'm going back over the, like, you know, the referring to the sons as like a horde, basically. It sounds like the strong in a lot of the ways they talk about consuming and seeing them like locusts, you know, the sons, the sense of locusts. But the way the POV is written, how like disconnected and achronological it is, it definitely seems like it is some sort of divinity, because it has that parallel with the White Luck Warrior, right?
Yeah.
So I
think that the Raku spoke of the Inchoroi as descending upon world after world as locusts.
Oh, true.
At the end of the White Luck.
Oh, that's a great point, right?
So, is there a locust reference in this section?
Yes. He calls them consume. This is, in my book, it's 45, about halfway down the page. Right after the passage Justin quoted of like, draws down its bladed fingers, you know, ripping a baby apart, basically. Consume, and he sees them descending as locusts, the sons drawn by the lure of his meat. There is a head, and it cannot be moved. So I, you know, that's interesting. If he's looking back at past Inchoroi, if this is the no god, right? Looking back at the other planets, even. I mean, that's something I hadn't even thought about.
Oh, and okay, this line is interesting. And he sees them descending as locusts, drawn by the lure of his meat, the sons. So if this is the Inchoroi and this is the no god. We were talking last time about the Raku was talking about how this planet was somehow special, that they couldn't bring the number down to 144,000, that they're still struggling to do that. So is it the presence of the no god that they are drawn to? Drawn by the lure of his meat? Whose meat? And is that what's making this planet special? Justin's laughing. What? Okay, I'll shut up. I think I know where you went. I'll shut up.
No, I mean, these are good questions. These are good questions. They definitely are. I don't know. I feel like the more I read this, the more I get concerned. I would get confused. I'm still trying to wrap my head around the living shall not haunt the dead, to be honest.
Yep.
You know, that's an inversion of like the way we usually think about, you know, the dead haunting the living.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to like imagine a scenario in which the other would be true. And
yeah.
So I wonder about that, if it's referring to that, if it's saying that the gods are living and people in Urwa are dead.
Ooh.
Yeah, I mean, the gods don't die, right? Unless they do. I mean, I guess the no god is the one thing that can kill them or make them cease. Unclear how that works. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the name the no god, like I think one of the things that was really intriguing when we first started reading this book is like some of the names, like the non-men, which we've, you know, come to realize that, like, you know, men gave them this name as a sort of, you know, it's like a spiteful, you know, way of naming them. The no god, like this sort of like anti-god, like as defined against like something familiar. I don't know.
I think that's a great point. I do think that hadn't occurred to me, but I do think that's where the name comes from, right? No God. It would be even more, I think, on the nose, and probably what Baker was hoping to avoid, if calling it like the anti-God. You know, it's the no God. It is what makes no gods.
And like some of the passages in this section, like somebody pointed out, you fear not damnation. Like you fear, and it does that, like when I read that, I'm like, does it mean you don't fear damnation, or you fear not damnation?
Right.
You know, like you fear like the absence of damnation, like, which like the gods would fear. The gods would fear not damnation, because like that would mean that they would have no means of survival. They depend on damnation.
Baker is playing language games with us. This is crazy.
The gods feeding off of the damned souls, like feeding, it feels a bit like a twisting of that, the mythology that says gods are only as powerful as the number of worshippers they have, but it's like a weird and twisted version of that.
Absolutely. It's God, yeah. Do we want to move on to I guess Surwa, and we already talked about him some, but
yeah,
as we were talking about, I think Justin, you pointed out the Mwama. Finally saw them, and they're like ape people.
They're just like, he even calls them halflings, and they're just like dark, twisted, like super strong, like, and they've had like the intelligence kind of bred out of them. They're like dark hobbits, you know, like they're like the most fucked up version of hobbits.
Oh, that's interesting.
And like
I hadn't made that connection. You're so right. That's exactly what they are. They're like fucked up hobbits.
They're like fucked up hobbits, and like the remaining non-men are like the most fucked up version of elves, you know.
Yes.
Like they're
wow.
It's so it's so awesome. Like it's just like
Wait, did we know that there was still Mwama in the world? Why is Sorville not at all surprised to see them?
I mean, I guess they must have known.
Yeah.
I don't know if we knew.
Yeah,
like
we didn't.
we knew they existed at some point, but I didn't know that they were still like.
Yeah, I thought they were extinct and the men replaced them or something. And oh man, that was such a dreary picture of. For a moment, I thought it was the sculptures in the building, but then it turned out to be real people who. What are they even doing? They're marching their way up to the no god to do what? Not no god, the non-men to the top of the mountain to do what? What are they trying to accomplish?
You mean the Mwama?
Yeah.
Oh.
We know why these three are going, but what about these guys?
It seemed like the Mwama like encountered the three of them and just sort of started following them. They were like sort of fascinated with them because they were, sort of alien.
Ooh.
And the Mwama are these very like simplistic people. They were just kind of like, whoa, like.
Interesting. I didn't think of that at all. The picture I had in my head, which is not at all warranted, is up the mountain. There's just these like two lines of Mwama bordering the staircase, and these guys are like sort of making their way between them, and the Mwama are just going up for some reason. But it makes so much more sense that they saw them and started following them.
They definitely were like into them. They were like they were intrigued, they were fascinated, entertained, by these outsiders, for whatever. I mean, in the same way, people are, I think that's actually a very human thing, right? That like, oh, strangers, like what's going on here,
Yeah.
And it was sad, I mean, that's the feeling I had, just how sad I was for these people, that they had been abused and bred and made into, I mean, admittedly, we're getting them from like Sorwell's perspective, right? So we're not getting the full picture, but like clearly, whatever the state of them is, it's not a happy one, they are living derelict lives, and it definitely does not paint a happy picture of the non-men, because they all did this, apparently. They took humans and just made, pack mules out of them.
So,
which, to be fair, humans did that to humans as well.
That's true. They're the ones who were also treated this cruelly in Kellhus, right? So we know.
Yes.
So I guess it's additionally painful that these guys see the non-men as something of gods, because they have been treated so poorly in the past, and that apparently they either have no memory of that or it's not something that signifies, so that they would go do something that they would at least like not bow down to them.
Yeah, it seems like their fear of the non-men is just like absolute.
Yeah.
It's like, it's like been bred into them. Like they just cower whenever they're near, which is, like at first it was kind of like, oh, this is like kind of interesting, and like almost in a weird I mean, I don't know that anything in this series has been cute, but like their initial encounter with them was like kind of curious, and then like it goes dark super fast. It's just like, oh god, they just like live their lives in terror.
It's true, absolutely. I mean, you think that like that's living life as a slave, right? It's living like where you just have no power, and if you don't have rights, or not even close to the equivalent rights, and just knowing that like you are lesser. And I mean, I think it's interesting too in the way that it like invites kind of questions and discussions of what it means to worship, and like what is worth worshiping, and like what the gods, like I'm reading a book on like Roman history, and how in a lot of like ancient religions, it wasn't, the gods weren't necessarily thought of as being moral. It was just simply you worshiped them because like you had to, like you wanted to keep the peace, like you wanted to keep everything chill. It wasn't because like you actively really wanted to. It was like because you needed to. And in the same way that kind of a lot of people worship like the Enrithi gods, for example, and all of that going on. And admittedly, the Fanen do not. They're demons, and you can kind of understand why they view them that way. And in the same way, the Mwama worshiping the non-men, you can understand it's like these incredibly immortal, incredibly powerful beings. What choice do you have? If you don't worship them, you die. And maybe everyone you love dies too.
Do you think the thing that happened at the end with all the Imama sort of attacking Sorvi and bringing him to his knees to the point where he's knocked unconscious, that was sort of Yatwar's intervention because they did not want the non-men to see his face and realize. And so one of two things could have happened, right? That they would also have observed the love that Sorvi apparently has for the Anasurimbor, or they would have noticed his hatred, which would, like, the first would make their, make their offering moot and, like, make them think suspect foul play. But if they did see the hatred that Sorvi has, then Serva might get suspicious. Like, she might start to believe Moengus. So I was wondering if the knocking of Sorvi unconscious was Yatwar's intervention so that the non-men basically don't see his face, so they don't know what he's thinking, and they take Serva and Moengus's word for it that he's an enemy.
That's really smart reading. I like that. That you do have the literally the slaves, right, who Yatwar represents. Yeah, make it so that his mask can't be discovered. I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, same. I had not thought of that at all, but like it seems completely possible and in fact likely.
It's a strong strategy. I mean, if I was Yatwar, I would absolutely make use of the Imwama in that regard. That makes sense.
Yeah. You wonder how many of them are damned, though. Is she just like starving off of the Mwama? I mean, she's probably getting her fill off of humans.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no shortage of humans to feast upon, no doubt.
Yeah. I guess the context-free damnation, I think, is pretty interesting. Just the rule-based damnation, right? It's reminding me a little bit of this. Well, I won't spoil a different book. Never mind. But we can talk about it. But some stuff in Perdido Street Station. I keep coming back to that. The contextful punishment.
That's on my list. I still need to read it.
Yeah.
Kind of Mieville in general is an author I want to read more of.
I like his books. I've read a couple and they're really good. I think they're good.
Want to go with the last chapter
I think
now?
so. I think
Let's do it.
this chapter's done. Esmenet, Kelmomus, Teliopa, how are we saying her name?
Yes. I'm a big fan of her.
Oh my god, I think I'm in love with that girl now. I love for some reason in the course of this chapter I decided I love the way she dresses.
She rocks. I don't know what to say. I think it's probably because you can't help but sympathize with her because she is such an outsider and disconnected from everyone and everything. And of course she is super intelligent and seems to be working to like keep shit together, I'm curious. Again, I'm waiting for the ball to drop with her to do something just terrible. I didn't like that she was like, Kelmomus, I'll let you be because our mom will go crazy if we tell her the truth of you. That made me upset because that fucking kid. But
Yes.
and it's going to blow up too. It's going to blow up in their face. Like, it's not like that kid has only made things worse, and letting him, I understand why she's concerned about Esmenet, and she has it is not illogical to want to keep Esmenet from completely falling apart, but like fucking Kelmomus is going to ruin everything, and it's almost certainly going to kill her. Like
Yeah.
Calliope, you're screwed.
Yeah.
You had your moment, and like you're done.
Like he's contemplating just in that scene how long it would take to bury her. That I mean, when she told him that she knows, I was like, he's gonna kill her. Damn it, he's at least going to think about it. And then 2 seconds later, it's like, oh, how long will it take to bury her? Nah, it'll take too long. So, have you finally reached your tipping point for terrible kids, Carl? Is that you admitting
I have
defeat?
not. I have strongly disliked him for a while, but God, I just want someone to kill this kid. It's horrible. I feel horrible saying that out loud. That's not a sentence I hope ever follows me on social media. But God, Kellhus is just truly the worst. And he wins. That's part of what's so frustrating. It's such a great dramatic trick, is you introduce someone who is the worst, and they succeed. And they succeed over and over again. And Kellhus continues to succeed. And particularly when they trick and make someone love them who you care for. Like, I care about Esminette, no matter all the, terrible stuff she does and all of her character flaws. I do care about her very deeply. And she just refuses to... She just cannot see him for what he is. And it's horrible. It's horrible, and it's all going to go wrong. It's already gone wrong.
I mean, I kind of agree with Calliope's strategy, though. Like, I've been for myself, and this is just because I don't want to see her fall apart yet. Maybe like Calliope, but for different reasons. I want to postpone her finding out about Kellhus for as long as possible.
If Maithanet was still alive, they wouldn't have to worry about it, because he could, lead the defense effort. But he's dead, so they don't have anyone. It's all Esminette, and this is the hole they dug themselves into. It's sad. It's a real tragedy, because it's no one person's fault. Like, it's not even all Kellhus' fault. Like, this is a lot of bad decisions and unfortunate happenstances, culminating into this deeply dangerous, tragic scenario.
Is it, if the voice speaking to Kellhus is in fact Samarmas, are we right in saying that, the hypothesis, is this correct, that Samarmas is all that's evil within Kellhus? So far it's been, oh, poor little, sweet little Sammy. But actually, Samarmas is everything that's evil about Kellhus. Maybe Kellhus was a sweet kid, and Sammy made him evil.
That's an interesting idea. Don't believe it. I mean, I just don't believe that's Sammy. At this point, I just don't think so. That it feels so metaphysically disconnected from everything we've known, as opposed to it's like an Occam's razor thing, where it's I actually don't think the simplest answer is that's Samarmas. How the fuck does that work in how we understand everything, right? The simplest answer is the gods are fucking with things, because that's what they do, and we know that, and they're everywhere.
So there is a bit of a logical explanation to the Samarmas thing, right? You remember when they were babies and they just kept staring at each other, and it was almost like they had one soul that was shared. So when they cut it off, they took a little bit of Sammy's soul, and it was the evil part of him into Kellhus. Whatever, cut it off.
You absorbed all the evil. I mean, I guess that I get what you're saying now. If he took all the evil in Sammy, I guess there is a logic there. Fair enough. Fair enough. But they did use divine magic to do that, seemingly. There was some sort of holy prayer, right?
That's true.
I don't know. Maybe it's both. Maybe Kellhus did get all the evil.
Yeah, and all the intelligence.
God haunting him.
Well, whatever. So that's why Sammy became an imbecile, because they took...
It's the evil that makes you smart.
No.
Everyone quote Varsha here.
No.
Any intelligence, that's the bad in you.
You're an imbecile if you're not evil.
Yeah.
That's a great blurb.
Okay. A lot of us.
Sweet-hearted idiots everywhere. The intelligent people, the fucking worst.
We're all giving some interesting sound bites for the future internet.
Carl's gonna be like, I hope someone kills that fucking kid. Carl the Albert.
Yeah, I can't wait for that. Yeah.
So
Lots of out of context quotes that are being had tonight.
I could say some more, but I'll shut up. There is one more thing. What was I going to say? Oh man, I forgot. The Narinder and the Esmenet. What do you think of Esmenet deciding to keep the assassin by her side? Was just
yeah, I mean, I don't know what to make of that. Like, I'm surprised that he's around. You know,
Yeah.
that he. I mean, I guess because Esmenet took the situation in hand and was just kind of like, yeah, this is the will of Kellhus. But like, yeah, I don't know. She's kind of like trying to make demands of him, and he's just like, I'll see what my God says to do. You know, like
Bad news.
loose
Bad
cannon.
news.
Loose cannon.
Absolutely. I mean, so here's why it's number one bad news for me is one of the White Luck Warrior visions, one of the POVs we got, Esmenet, the Empress, I think he calls her the Empress, is dead. And I think he even says he kills her. So that's why it's bad news. That said, it's not surprising to me,
Yeah.
right? Like if he in some way kills her or is at least around for her dying, like, of course he's going to stick around. I mean, he's absolutely a loose cannon, right? We don't know what, like, we know, you know, I think we've used the kind of the metaphor of like the slow moving bullet. We know what he's been aimed at, right? Kellhus is the end goal. But like the path that leads there, we don't know what that looks like. Like that is extremely unclear at this point. And you know, I'm very curious to see how this siege plays out. The one thing I will say for keeping Kellhus around is he is effective at what he does, and he can be sneaky. And so if his mom is in danger, I do think he will protect her, you know, even though it's out of like motivated by his own narcissistic little weird child mommy issue bullshit. He will go out of his way to protect her and make sure that she, you know, is there for him. So that is good news. But at the same time, it seems like Esmenet is doomed. And so, I don't know. I just hope the White Luck Warrior kills Kellhus in the process.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I didn't think about this either. Like Baker has set up a nice, complicated problem to solve here. In that, like, there's zero communication allowed between the Great Ordeal and Momin now, and so like, how does the White Luck Warrior bridge that gap? Like, you know, how does he get to Kellhus? Like, Kellhus is, and now we know Kellhus has absolutely no interest in what happens in Momin. He doesn't give a shit. He doesn't give a shit if Esmenet dies, presumably. So like, you know, if that happens, like, he won't just like come back. He's
Right.
like, he's all in. So yeah, that's kind of fun. I do think the siege is going to, you know, something's going to have to happen as a result of this siege.
Sorry, I forgot. The beginning of the chapter with Esmenet throwing peaches at the guy, I was like, wait, I have to keep reminding myself that the snippets we get are the future. I think, when did this happen? This is so ridiculous. And how did I not remember it? But then we see it later and it makes sense, but just taken out of context like that with Esmenet randomly throwing peaches at him. I was like, what was that?
Lots of fruit.
Lots of fruit.
Lots of fruit.
That is clearly a very specific choice of fruit.
We have apples, peaches.
I hope she doesn't end up sleeping with him. That would just be, God, it's going to happen. And I'm speaking that into existence. I don't know, man. throw on the peach. That feels like a very deliberate symbolic choice, considering what peaches have stood for all this time. But I don't know. It's interesting because that's like a weapon for her, right? Her sexuality is a weapon for her. It's a tool. And I wouldn't be surprised if she tries to use it to control him, in the same way she kind of used it to control Imhylus. And it backfires because he doesn't care.
So are we supposed to think that this guy still has the White Luck Warrior in him, or a part of him anyway?
I think so. At this point, I think so, yeah.
And is this where he's residing now while other things happen, or is he off elsewhere doing other things too?
I don't know.
Yeah. Very confusing, this White Luck Warrior business.
This goes back to our theory of like the body hopping of it all, because like I don't know how the White Luck Warrior gets to, if Sorwheel is supposed to kill Kellhus and is the avatar of some way of Yop, like, are these two separate problems? Like, how would this work out otherwise, right? And everything the White Luck Warrior has seen has come true. So theoretically, the White Luck Warrior is going to kill Kellhus, because we have seen him kill Kellhus. I guess we haven't seen him kill Kellhus. We've seen him there when Kellhus is dead. So maybe he doesn't kill Kellhus. But I don't know. It is an interesting conundrum, as Justin pointed out. Like, how do you solve this problem? And clearly Baker knows how. And I'm curious to see how that plays out.
Baker knows how. There was an interesting moment in the prologue when Esmenet is desperately looking for Kellmomus, when, I don't know why I didn't see this before, but she calls him Kell, which also is what they used to call Kellhus. And so the parallel with the level of affection she has for this kid and the level to which he's manipulating her. Well, at least we know, I don't know that this changes anything, but at least we know that Kellmomus bears some genuine affection for her, which Kellhus probably never did. But I
disagree with that. I think he does, but it's not enough,
Mm-hmm.
I think he cared for Surway, he cares for Esmenet, and we know he cared for Surway.
Yeah, that's fair. Maybe, yeah, sure, not to the same degree, but it was affection that isn't necessarily returned or the same, but her desperate affection for the two, I think that was very interesting. Like, when she went hunting for Kellmomus.
That is a very interesting parallel. That's a great point. I mean, she in some ways is repeating her arc, or it's not the exact same, but this falling in love with Kellmomus is not a man. He is a boy, but a male figure in her life. And initially it was like, oh, my lover, Kellhus, I worship him. He is greater. And now she also has that sort of same unhealthy, he is perfect, he is pure view of Kellmomus, but from this maternal, my child, my son point of view, right? It's like she's falling for the same problem, just with a different sort of twisted POV. And maybe Baker's saying that in his own fucked up Freudian way, that it's really the same problem, just on a different, object, or subject, as it were. But yeah, I think that's an intelligent observation, Varsha. It really is. There is strong parallels there, and I don't know. So here's a theory that I do not feel strongly that I believe in, but what if Kellhus? I fully believe. I mean, this is something I didn't say about the end of the White Luck Warrior. I found it so satisfying to know that Kellhus, or at least that Maythanet believes that Kellhus created the Empire knowing that it was going to fall, and that he didn't create it to succeed. Because I know one of my first thoughts was like, he is such a tyrant. I brought this up, I think, early when we were discussing the Judging Eye, that he's being so evil, so tyrannical, that people are going to revolt. Like, this empire cannot last. You cannot be this cruel and this consistently and govern. And that is the end game, right? That he pulls out anything you'd have to stop it. This army, that it was essentially a whole strategy to get the Great Ordeal, right? That was the end game. The Empire is not the end game. The Empire is just a step along his journey to stopping the consult. But what if, part of the reason he's cut off communications even from himself is because he is concerned that if he hears that Esmenet is in danger or that Esmenet has been killed, that he will feel the need to go back and do something, because otherwise, like, why not, keep in touch? That doesn't harm him logistically at all, unless he feels that he personally would react, that he cannot control himself completely if he doesn't cut himself off completely, cut the umbilicus, if you will.
Nice.
Thank you.
Nicely done. That is a great point. I didn't think of that at all. And yeah, I wouldn't have gone there. Honestly, at this point, I don't know what to think of Kellhus and his ability to feel any affection for anyone, but
Right.
if anyone, it would probably be Esmenet. But I feel like that expresses a level of vulnerability that would probably scare him. And it makes sense that fear is like, this would be the kind of action you take in fear to like tell yourself, no, I do not actually care for this person. But that feels like a very human thing to do, not
Right.
necessarily Dunyain. So yeah, if that is right, I would like to see the extent of that. I'm actually excited for the Kellhus POV. Like it's been, I know we've had some listeners say that the lack of Kellhus POV makes this series easier to read, and I think maybe I felt that too to a certain extent. But now that it's back, I'm glad, because we have more information about what the heck he's up to, and this. As we're beginning to wrap up the series, I think it makes sense that through this we might get some answers.
Yeah. In a way, I think, the Dunyain, assuming the Dunyain have human origins and like whatever they are now, but like, it is a very Dunyain impulse to cut yourself off, right? Like that's in fact what they've done, because I think, they fear their human nature, right? They fear their ability, their vulnerability to be tainted. So like, I think that's actually really insightful. Like in light of that like it's kept maybe Kellhus's fear of his own humanity that is, part of the motivation for cutting off communication here.
So going off of this too, what if that is why, and maybe he isn't even conscious of this? Like maybe this is all a subconscious thing, because I think kind of the basis for this is one, that Kellhus does feel, which we do know is true to some extent, right? And on top of that, my belief that the Dunyain are not as cut off from the darkness that comes before as they believe they are, that they are still driven by feelings, they're just not aware of them, that there is still some sort of motivating factor going on inside them. What if that's why he killed Moingus? That he was, deep down, a part of him was concerned that any affection he felt for his father would get in the way. And so he self-rationalized it as, Moingus is a traitor. Moingus would be a traitor. I have to kill him, And that it wasn't really about, the concern of the betrayal so much as it was stopping himself from having a liability, eliminating all the liabilities. And that this is sort of a similar version of that, where it's like, remove this, cut off that umbilical cord, right? So that I don't even, if I don't have to see it, if I don't have to hear it, I'm not concerned about it. Because we do know he's concerned about his father, right? Like he went on that whole journey for his father, and supposedly to kill him. Supposedly that was the plan the entire time. But that, when we were in his head, was not what he was thinking about the entire time. He clearly was not going like, I am definitively going to kill my father. And so, he certainly never consciously thinks this or says this, but maybe that is a motivating factor in him, and that he is still deep down driven by the same things as everyone else. But he is not consciously aware of it because he believes he's cut himself off. And so the way, in kind of the Dunyain tactic of it, exactly as you were saying, Justin, is to physically like cut himself off from those things.
Yeah, that does square with all the thoughts we get of like how he keeps talking to Moingus throughout the first series.
Exactly.
Um,
Right?
yeah, like almost like a child seeking their parents' approval, but we
100%.
thought we knew better at the time. Maybe not.
Well, exactly. And I think you could almost compare it to like, I think everyone at some point, feels like, I think teenagers probably, it's most obvious, are a lot like rebel. And at some level, what they're really searching for is some sort of connection with their parents, right? Or, whether that's approval or whatever, it is still driven by that parental connection, that there's just something base inside them that they are not aware of, that they feel like, no, I want to be independent. I want to be on my own. But ultimately, it's all about drawing them back to the parents, right? It's about their relationship, their connection to their parents. And that in the same way, Kellhus cannot help but think of his father. He cannot help but be driven literally towards his father. And so when he gets to that point, he ultimately feels, he finds this rationalization for, I have to kill my father, because otherwise he will betray me, he will betray humanity. Which we are not given any reason other than what Kellhus says to believe that is objectively true, because we don't know that the Dunyain would all be damned. I mean, I think it is reasonable to believe it because they do pretty fucked up things, but it's not like they're not sorcerers. They're not just like flatly mechanically damned. I don't know that they all. I guess we just don't know a lot about the Dunyain, so it's hard to say, if they are seemingly deserving of damnation or not.
Yeah, they don't believe in God. I don't know what
Yeah.
that has to
That's
take
true.
some points off for the balance of your
No,
soul.
that's a great point. I mean, that alone may be enough to damn them.
Yeah. Is it time to do quotes? Do we have more topics to discuss?
Let's do quotes.
Steve.
I do feel like this book specifically has a similar. I think the writing is more like the first trilogy. I think it more of those quotes that stick out. One of the ones that stuck out to me was on page 30. History murders the children of weak rulers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good one. Ooh, I like this one. The world seemed to roll as a ball beneath them. So vast was the great ordeal.
Go ahead.
At the first occurrence of the living should not haunt the dead. I wrote, means what? that was my note.
That's a good quote, though.
I like that. I have one quote that I underlined on page 100 from my copy. And it's like sort of Esmond at POV. It says, fate was not so much a whore as a whore maker, snapping the pious like twigs, warming herself in the fires that had been honor.
That's a great one.
Wow.
And that's really good.
That's
really
a good one.
I read that and I was like, wow, that's like, I think I audibly like said that out loud. It's like, man.
Yeah. Page 47. Confusion was ever the herald of genuine insight.
I do love the epigraph in chapter 3. Men who belong to nature apprehend their nature as law, when it seems to them to be restraint, and as nature when it seems to them to be unruly. Thus do some sages say that a lie merely divides men from beasts. Because, I just think that definitely speaks to people. Human beings definitely like to view themselves as apart from nature. And to be the parts of them that are natural or, base or uncontrollable, right? When in some sense it's all nature. It's all, we are part of nature.
Page 43, the man leaned according to the angle of his desperation.
Oh, yes. I like that. There were some Sorville passages that I really liked that I'm trying to find, but of course not. What did Sarva mean that I am Seshwata's friend? So was it that they'll be accepting of her? Kind of like Neil Gaius was a little bit of a Kamian.
I don't remember the exact quote. I mean, that makes sense. I mean, she dreams Seswatha. In some sense, she is Seswatha. So clearly, that was a mistake on Akamian's part to believe that the friendship would be meaningful.
I'm so excited to get some more interaction with. Well, to get some interaction with non-men to try to like form a more definite idea of like their particular brand of madness and like morality. You know, like I mean, it's so unique and interesting. Like, I'm really excited to like see a little bit more of that. And however, sorry.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was just saying, however, like, you know, confusing and opaque, Baker reveals that to us. Like.
And these are non-men who are presumably sold out to the consult, right? Or to the Inchoroi. So
Totally.
That's going to be some interesting interactions. And I love that Ishterabinth means exalted stronghold. Like there's just something about that word that feels strong. And we didn't talk too much about the architecture. Like I don't know why I thought after Kill Augers that they're going to like just some random fortress. Of course it is a fortress carved out of the very mountain. Like, that is brilliant.
Yes, absolutely. I'm right there with you. I love that. I love fantasy architecture when they just go for it. Yes. Amen.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Weeping Mountain too is interesting. Like
such a good name. That is such a good name. Yes.
So who's doing the weeping? It was a legit sound that they heard. Are we to think it was the Mwama, or are the non-men weeping, or did they make the mountain weep with their magic?
Just wait.
Yes.
Steve Shwata has spoken.
I love it. Shwata, yes.
All right, we shall wait. So let's do outros then. Steve, kick us off.
Sure. You can find me on Page Chewing or all the other wonderful podcasts that we have there. Page Chewing, also Speculative Speculations, and I have to do this because Carl won't, but go read Truth of Crowns by Carl D. Albert. Go look it up on Amazon. Go read the book and enjoy it, because if you like this series, you'll certainly like Carl's work. So go read it. It's a great book.
Thank you.
I agree. Carl?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm on Page Chewing. Otherwise, you can find me throughout social media at Carl D. Albert. I am around, but I will probably be more responsive on Page Chewing. Ideally, not Twitter. I hate Twitter. I've stopped going on Twitter because I hate it so much. Anyway, that's me.
I'm gonna take Steve's advice. I feel like I can't believe I haven't read Truth of Crowns yet. Actually, like
I appreciate.
It's ridiculous. There's no reason for it. I'm gonna order it right now. As soon as we're done, I'm gonna order it so that I can read it. But I'm Justin. You can find me on Page Chewing and mostly on my bicycle in the summertime. So that's mostly on my bicycle, and then occasionally online in this fun conversation.
Steve and Justin can go biking together.
Yes, definitely.
And you can sorry, you guys. Okay. You can find me on the YouTube channel Reading by the Rainy Mountain, on the podcast Speculative Speculations, and Haunting the Page Chewing Forums. Thank you so much for listening. As always, we really do appreciate all your support. And we will see everyone in a week with, I think, the next 4 chapters. Thank you so much. Bye.